Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. Today we're going to be drawing and painting these 5 fall leaves in watercolor pencil. Join me in the studio as we take time to enjoy the beauty God's placed in this season. Let's go ahead and get started. Now I've gone ahead and cut up a variety of sizes of cheap watercolor paper like Canson XL because I am wanting to add water because I'm working in watercolor pencil. So you probably do want a watercolor paper, but a cheap one is totally fine for this. You could also, instead of drawing these as large as I'm doing today, you could draw them really small and use them in your scripture writing journal or your planner, in which case I would opt for pencil crayons or colored pencil instead of watercolor pencil. You can also cut up small pieces of paper like I've done here, and then I use them like an element on handmade cards. These are just the covers, but you can go ahead and put something like that, layer some other papers on there, stamps like I did here, whatever, and then make a handmade card with them. So you could definitely do that as well. But I'm sure you have other ideas possibly in your mind, and I'd be curious to know what you're planning to do with your leaves. Let's go ahead and start with a more simple leaf. We're just going to do a single vein, and then we're going to go and do some at the side, just using a little bit of a bumpy, I don't know, I'm trying to have less stability in my arm or like wiggling things around a little bit as I do those outside lines. And then I'm going to come in and almost with like a flicking motion, heavier pressure, lighten off. I'm going to do these veins and I'm going to stagger them a little bit. And kind of swing outwards to the outside of the leaf. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the exact same thing, except I'm going to do 3 leaves this time. So I'm going to start again with a center vein. Then I'm going to have 1 on each side. And then on each of those, I'm going to be putting a leaf. And you can change the shape of your leaf if you want to make it, start a little thinner at the bottom and get a little bit wider, almost like what I've done here. You can kind of switch things up as you go in terms of where you want the wideness of your leaf to go. Just kind of make them all the same more or less on each branch. So, if you've got one that's a little bit wider at the top, try and kind of think that way with all of them. Again, flicking outwards. And I'm going to try and simplify how many veins I get, the more leaves I get on each little cluster or branch. This time I'm going to start with my vein starting at the top, and I'm going to come downwards. And then I'm going to come off of it kind of on each side with, I'm going to try and make this come upwards a little bit with a vein. And then I'm going to try and put one on each, kind of almost like right in the middle of the last 2. Or I should say the middle of, I've got my first one, and then I've got these 2 side ones. So this one is, these 2 are going to kind of almost split or divide those sections into half again. Then we'll go ahead and I'm going to do longer leaves this time. Longer, skinnier leaves. And I'm going to put 1 leaf on each of these veins. And I'm going to try and get a little more wiggly here. I feel like I'm a bit contrived. And there is our compound leaf that's got 5 smaller leaves on it. And with this one, I'm going to actually make the veins a little bit longer, like they're drooping downwards, kind of with the shape of our long leaf. So now that we've got that one down, let's go ahead and try a maple leaf. Those are the most challenging in my opinion, but let's go ahead and see if we can do one. So we're going to start again with a center vein, but why don't we keep things simple for ourselves and do it more kind of in the center and just do it upright, just because doing it a little bit, on an angle or tipped can make it just that smidgen bit harder. So let's go ahead and do that. And then we're going to put a vein coming off each side, kind of almost right across from each other, close to the bottom. And then we'll do we're going to have one kind of almost like center of each of these again. So very similar to what we did with this, right? Where we got those 5, and then we're going to put a tiny little one on each side right there, just along the bottom. All right, now instead of doing individual leaves on these, we are going to do a point on each of them. So they kind of, it's something like this. It's almost like you can almost think about it like a crown or something, or the top of a wave that's just poking straight up. And then it's going to kind of come to a couple little points at the side. And then sometimes they even come to a second point, like kind of do something really fancy like that. You could just have 1 point on each one though. I'm going to try and get a little more interest on here. And they don't have to be exact on both sides. It's probably better if you make them so that they're different on both sides. And just work lightly. And as you can see what I'm doing here, because I'm not as confident, I'm working lighter and I'm going over it several times just to kind of refine my shape. Because as I said, this is tricky, and I actually don't have a lot of maple leaves around where I live. So it's something I'm looking at a reference photo for. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of take a bumpy road as I come up here. So again, some of these little pointy things, and then get to my main point, and then I can kind of work my way down. And not every maple leaf is perfectly symmetrical, and I'm going to try and avoid perfect symmetry, I think, because when I do that, I'm not as happy with it. So I'm going to just take a little artistic license here and kind of add in my little bumps without being perfectly symmetrical. You know what, I'm going to come back and fix this one after I feel like I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be happy with it. So let's just go over here and get this one done first. And then I'll come back over and see what I think. As you can see, I'm definitely getting it different on both sides. Maybe even more different than I should be. I might tweak this vein here so it's a little bit more upright. Again, because we're going to be coloring it, we have the opportunity to kind of tweak things as we go and fix things. Again, try and get that point. So again, it's always like there's that main point, and then it comes down with like the two smaller points, at least two small points beside it, and then sometimes more. And I would say not even every leaf is perfectly. And then when we get here, I need to create a small leaf in this section. These can kind of have the appearance of being a little leaf right here, and somehow join it to this one. Let's try that over here. Yeah, I think I don't mind that. So I would just say play with it. You want to kind of think of your 5 main veins in the center, and then these 2 small ones kind of at the base. And then just try and build your leaf around that, doing this point. And you can be perfectly symmetrical if you want, where you kind of just come with one main point and then perfectly like bloop, bloop, and then straight down, and do the exact same thing on each of these. You can definitely do that, but like I said, when I was making mine too symmetrical, I wasn't as happy with it. So I'm taking a little artistic license and making it a little less symmetrical. I'm going to call that good for now, and I will then add my veins. And these veins kind of follow the same sort of principles as what we were doing on our other leaves. So we can just add a few of them. You can make them come all the way down. I tend to make them smaller as I get closer to the base here, because they kind of get a little bit interesting where you want to taper, let's say it this way, you want to taper that vein off before it kind of hits this next, almost you could say section of leaf beside it. So just kind of let those taper off down here. Basically, what you want to avoid is having like the veins kind of colliding into each other, really obviously. And then you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to erase a little bit here. I feel like I could kind of pull this in a bit and pull this in a bit. So this is just a little bit straighter. So just go ahead and erase. And you can see the watercolor pencil does erase fairly well, especially because I'm working lightly. And that's what I always recommend, especially when you're doing something you're not 100% sure you're going to hit perfectly the first time. Work light, and then you can just add more layers as you go. The next leaf we're going to do is an oak leaf, and it's another one that I'm not as familiar with. So as I said, anything you're not familiar with, grab a reference photo or just do your best, follow along, and give yourself grace. You can definitely practice this more than once. So I think I went a little bit far with that pencil line, didn't I? That's a little bit extreme. Okay, and then what I'm going to do with this one, rather than start the outside of the leaf first, I'm going to do the veins first, but I'm going to give myself a little bit of a parameter. This is just a regular drawing pencil that I can erase, and I'm going to draw for myself just a kind of a little bit of a guideline so that I don't draw my veins in places I don't want them. So I'm going to just put some crosshairs across here, about there. This is probably where I'm going to make my widest section of the oak leaf to be. So it starts narrow, comes up, gets wide, gets narrower again, and so it's almost like a diamond. You could do this straight on. I am doing this a little bit on its side, which makes it interesting. You could absolutely have done just a straight line and make it more like a T shape, and then draw your outline, it would look more like a diamond. You could have done that as well. I just did mine a little bit sideways here, so that's why this is looking as interesting as it is. Then I'm going to go ahead and do some veins. I'm going to slightly stagger them. They're kind of across from each other, but they're slightly staggered. So I'm just going to do this, but you can see I'm trying to sort of more or less stay within this diamond shaped box that I made for myself. And then these ones will be a little bit shorter over here. And then I'm going to go ahead and try and do my outside shape of this leaf. And so this, I'm going to try and really be bumpy as I do this and try and be less controlled and just come down and basically imagine that these are kind of like outlining my veins. You can see I'm not following everything perfectly, but it's giving me at least a guideline. And as I said, practice this if you need to on pencil, just with regular pencil in your sketchbook or on a scrap of paper. It's a challenging leaf in my opinion, could just be because I'm less familiar with it, but there we go. And then what you can do is come in and erase any of those lines. You could use a kneadable eraser like I've got. It's a little more gentle, or just any eraser. Get rid of your pencil. And I am lifting a little bit of the watercolor pencil when I do this, but it doesn't lift quite as easily as a regular pencil, so you can mostly see it, and then I can just come back in and deepen things a little bit more if I want to with my regular watercolor, or I should say my watercolor pencil. So not perfect. If you're really familiar with oak leaves, you'll probably go, oh, it's not really a very good oak leaf, but I think it's not too bad. So I'm gonna leave it like that. Now, before you go ahead and fill your leaves in with color, you'll want to go ahead and make sure you've maintained your veins and they don't disappear on you. So I'm going to take a darker color. In this case, I've got burnt sienna, and I'm just going to go over my veins and just darken them a bit so that when I color, because I'm planning to color this with yellow, I don't want to lose the lines that I've got already there, and those would get obliterated if I'm using the same color to color it. One thing you don't want to do though is to outline your leaves with the darker color. You want to keep those nice and light so that any color that you're using will blend in with them and you won't have the coloring book outline effect when you're done. And then you can go ahead and grab your favorite fall colors and start filling it in. I like to fill things in first with a lighter solid color. You can choose to color them with a soft, gentle circular motion like I'm doing here, or you can color with line following the direction of the veins like I'm doing in this one. And this is where you can outline your leaves using the same color as you've decided to color the leaf, and that way it will help blend in a little bit more. For my yellow base coats, I am using golden ochre or light yellow ochre, but if you prefer a more vibrant yellow, you can definitely use that as well. Do you enjoy working in watercolor pencil? If so, I think you'll be interested in my free 2-part pencil technique mini workshop. Whether you're looking for ways to add texture to your work, or if you simply enjoy coloring and would like to add dimension to your coloring pages, this workshop is for you. You can even apply many of these techniques to graphite pencil or other dry media. I'll share examples of how I apply these techniques to inspire you with ideas for your own artwork. You can sign up for this workshop at the link in the description below. Now back to today's video. And this is also a great time when you're doing your outlines to add a little more shakiness to your leaf. If you discovered that you were maybe a little too contrived the first time around, and I was definitely struggling a bit with that on the maple leaf, so this is a perfect time to kind of add a little more of a jumpy, more organic look. If at any point your veins are not dark enough to go with the color that you've chosen to color your leaf in with, just go ahead, grab a darker color. I've got my red violet here by Faber-Castell, and I'm darkening my veins a little bit more just so that I don't lose them under the reds that I'm going to be applying still. With my maple leaf, because I do have quite a lot of yellow around the edge and this red is feeling a little bit too blasé, I'm going to go ahead with my yellow ochre, or my golden ochre rather, and just add a little bit more of that in some places to this maple leaf. So I'm just increasing the amount of yellow that's kind of here, and it's going to blend and show a little bit more as I wet things later. All right, let's talk about adding extra depth to these leaves now. And The first one we're going to start with is our basic leaf. And the reason I want to start with this one is I want to show you ways that you can add more to just a basic leaf. I'm not going to be doing this to all of the leaves because some of them are rather complex, as you know, but with a basic leaf, sometimes you can make these veins branch out a little bit more. Sometimes veins, you can actually see more than one vein happening, you know, as it branches here. So you can always do that sometimes when you are feeling like you need a little bit more detail in your veins. You can always add, you know, make these ones a little longer and then have one of them branch off. Now I want to discuss the ways you can also add shadows. And I've talked about this before, but I think it's a really good opportunity to bring this up again. And that's about our light source and how our light source affects the way the shadows fall on our leaves. So I'm going to grab an orange that's just, it's dull, but it's darker than the golden color that I have here. And I'm going to go ahead and we're just going to say that our light source is on this side. Now, I don't want to draw directly on here because, you know, this might work out cute for a card. So I'm just going to grab another piece of paper and slide it behind here just to pretend we extended this page a little bit, but it's not actually, we're not going to draw on our page. And let's draw ourselves a little sun to tell ourselves where our light source is. So there's our little sunshine. And as I said, a lot of times I do like to make my light source coming from the right, just as kind of my habit. But I'll draw the sun at the right side of the leaf, and then I will draw a little arrow to remind myself the way the light is coming down onto the leaf, which means the light's going to hit this area more so, right? Because it's closer to the light. And then as it gets further from the light and we get closer to the vein, we're going to have more shadow. So I'm going to fill this in with some shadow, and I'm just using kind of a circular, slightly linear motion just to fill that section in. And you can kind of have it gently get a little bit lighter as it gets closer to the sun, a little darker as it gets closer to the vein. And then it's going to get more light again as it kind of comes up, almost like, you know, it gets deeper, like a slight bit of a valley, a little bit darker where the vein is. Then let it get light again, and then we're going to darken this furthest side of the leaf that's the furthest from the light. So I'm just going to come in here and fill this whole area in with a little bit more of a deeper color of gold or orange. And this is actually like perfectly fine to just leave it like this in terms of the shadow, and it's beautiful like this. But if you want to get a little bit more into the way the shadows would actually work with each of these veins, we can do that as well. I'm going to ignore the extra veins that we added. I'll just focus on the bigger veins that we've created here. And I'm going to show you how you could create darkness along them as well. And that's to make the shadows get darker on the side of the vein. Like, so the light's coming, again, it's, let's say it's somewhat above and to the right. So let's just slide this over a little bit. So the light is coming from above, but more from the right. And we can kind of get a little bit more of our shadow as it comes down into the valley of each of these veins, if you will. It's hard to see on this side because it's so in shadow anyway, but going darker when I'm close to the vein and then lighten off. Let's do it a little bit further along here. You can see it better. And this is a little more advanced, so don't feel like you have to do this to your veins, particularly every little vein. But it's something, if you're wanting a little bit of a challenge, you could play with this a little bit. Then I'm doing the same thing kind of along the bottom, except it's a little more confusing because the veins are a little bit more upright, if you will. But you can kind of get the impression that the light is kind of hitting more the right side of each section of the leaf. So you could say with this section on the right side, it's lighter, and then it gets darker as it comes closer to the vein. Then it gets light, gets dark. You can see that light, and it gets dark as it's further to the left. With this one, I'm not going to worry about the shadows on each vein. Instead, I'm just going to go ahead and create a little bit more shadow as it gets, again, I'm going to say the same light source and have things get darker as they come away from the light. So more on the left side of this leaf, and just focus on the main vein here in terms of my shadow. And I'm using a darker color. This is a Venetian red, but any kind of slightly rusty color is fine. You could even use oranges or brighter reds for this. You can see I'm using more muted neutral colors on mine, but there's no reason you can't choose brighter, more vibrant fall colors. Now with these two leaves here, we can decide which one we want to have kind of on top. If we want to say this one is on top, we can push this one behind by darkening even more where the edges are meeting so that it kind of gives the impression that this one is behind. So that's a little trick you can do for pushing leaves behind each other. Okay, that was not very clear. I didn't do a very good job getting my shadow on the left side of this. I don't mind having a bit of shadow in here just because this leaf is overlapping, right? But I really want to make sure that I still push the shadows on the left side of this leaf, since we did say our light was coming from the right. We also want to get our shadow on the left side of this section. So I'm going to lift a little bit of what I did here, maybe because it's getting a bit dark. Like, I don't mind it being a little bit darker just because it is behind that one, but I've really pushed this way too dark. Sorry about that. See, sometimes I talk about light source and I still kind of mess up, or a lot mess up. Just lifting that out with a kneadable eraser. And let's just throw a bit more of our golden ochre color in there. That's better. And then I'm just going to add a little extra of this red to the edges of the leaf on this one, especially the outer edges and the tips. And then finally, some purple on top of that red. This is my red violet, but we could even actually add some of this later on with our paint. So maybe we won't even add so much right now, because this will actually be a lot of fun to add once we add our water. So why don't I just keep this minimal for now, and then we can emphasize it a little bit more. Actually, let's do the veins quick with this purple color. It'll help warm everything up a little bit. Why don't we do something a little different with our oak leaf? Why don't we make it more green in the center? We'll say it's not quite as turned into fall colors yet, and we'll do a little bit more of a rusty color on the outside. So I'm just coming in closer to these veins, and I'm not even worrying about shading right now. I'm just filling in the whole center of the oak leaf with more of a greenish color. So this is a really light, slightly olive muted green, but it's probably any light green would work in this case because we're going on top of sort of a neutral golden yellow. And so it's going to allow the green to look a little more dull just because it's on top of another dull color. But this green that I'm using, it is a dull green. And I am just working with circular motion. Why don't we go ahead and add a little bit of shadow, make things just a smidgen darker as we get kind of further from the light on each of these little sections. So just where we're getting close to the vein. Even though I've put a touch more green on the left side of this vein, which would make it have a left side light source, it really doesn't matter where you put your darker side, because with this leaf, we're going to be focusing on color variation more than light and shadow. Throwing a tiny little bit of burnt sienna to increase the shadow look, but I don't want to go overboard because again, I want to kind of maintain a little bit of that green look as if it's almost like I said, maybe not quite so fall yet. And if we want, we can add a little bit of something to the edges. We could either use our burnt sienna and keep this really brown, or we could pick a slightly, prettier color for our edges, which maybe we could do. Let's just try a tiny little bit of red. I don't want to go overboard here, but I'm just going to put a very, very soft amount of this kind of bright red orange on the edges of some of these, just the outer edges. And then I'll call that good. And now finally, I'm thinking I'm going to push this red violet a little bit, maybe in the center around these veins, as well as a little bit kind of at the tips of each of these. I don't know if you call them leaves or parts of the leaves. All right, so let's go ahead and start adding our water. So I've got my little water jar handy, and I'm using a number 6 brush, and I've also got my piece of paper towel nice and handy too, because I'm going to be dabbing it off often as I do this. I've talked about this in my other videos, but we always want to start with our lightest section and work into our dark. So I'm going to come in here, I'm dropping some water into my lightest areas. I'm not worrying about the smallest veins. I'm kind of trying to work almost, you could say, within the sections a little bit of the larger sections. I'm not worrying about those really tiny wispy veins we did. And then I'm coming into the darks and blend that in. And then I'm going to come over here and blend. I'm not worrying about leaving white gaps the way I would with watercolor if I was doing them one after another, because the colored, or the watercolor pencil rather, sort of stays a little bit where you put it if you don't drown it with water. So I'm just going to go ahead and wet that side. I think I can probably get away with doing both sides at the same time if I don't apply too much water. You can even do one whole section. And then again, you'll want to clean your brush before you go into your light areas if you want to maintain your lights as light as they are. If you don't wash your brush, you can see I've already got some on here. That's not bad because I don't have too much color. You can see, you can go how far you want, or until you feel like your brush isn't clean enough anymore and just wash it off. But you can kind of start to see now I'm really starting to drag the paint around because I wasn't washing it. So wash it again, and then I'll come in here, and there's no rhyme or reason for the order I went this time. I just kind of jumped in. So if you want to be proper and organized, you could start at one side of the leaf. I'm going to start the light side of this one, work my way to the darks. And then let's see what happens if I don't wash my brush. Can I do this? Yeah, I'm okay. It's one of those things you have to really be paying attention to, because if you have too much pigment on your brush, you'll just drag the dark pigment everywhere and you're going to lose your light. So the big goal is to make sure your brush is clean enough that you don't obliterate your white or lightest sections of each leaf. It's happening a little bit right there. So I just dab my brush off on my paper towel, wash it again. And let's go over here and see how we can do this. I don't mind this side being a bit darker, so. I'm okay with that. I feel like I'm kind of losing some depth a little bit. I feel like it's not quite as bold as I would like it to be, but that's okay. Let's try this section. We can always add more if we discover we need to after. Again, you can almost see I'm almost directing the darkest paint downwards, and now because I'm quite dark, or I should say my brush has a lot of pigment, I wash it, come back in, and finally drag this down here. Wash and dry. And if you ever feel like your shapes are getting too similar or they're blending together, that's where you just want to let your painting dry between doing the shapes. So if you discover this leaf, say, was blending into this one, it would mean this one's still too wet, and you just want to make sure it's a little drier. Watercolor pencils aren't quite as fussy about that as just plain watercolor, but it's still something to be aware of. I'm looking forward to doing this leaf. I'm going to start in my light sections. Let's go over here and work our way around. And I'm trying to not massage the veins in too much as I wet this. So I'm doing the lightest orange first, and I'm going to come into the tip of my leaves here in a quick second. Okay. Did my brightest orange, and let's go into here. And you can see this is very, very vibrant and intense. And that's the thing with watercolor pencils to be aware of. Everything's going to get way more intense and vibrant as you add water. Now I'm just going to just gently work these veins just a teeny weeny little bit. Don't want to overdo them, because you can see things are kind of mushing around a bit. You can even do them at the end if you want to, but I don't mind a little bit of paint flow in there. So I'm just going to let them be. Let's go and do this orange section first, or the lightest section, and then work my way into the reds, and then finally into the purples. I'm just doing the 1/2 of the leaf to start with. Okay, then I'm going to wash my brush because I've got a lot of purple and red on there, and come over to this side. Again, oranges first. Into the reds, and finally into my purples. Now I might let this one dry just because it's quite wet. I'll skip over and do this one and then this one, and then I'll come back to this one. And again, bright orange sections, move into the reds, finally move into the purples. All right, I'm gonna do one side of the leaf at a time. This one is gonna be a little more challenging just because we have 3 colors and we have a green as well as that red. And green and red will kind of go muddy if we get them too close together or mush them around too much. So I'm gonna start in the yellow. And I'm just gonna add some water to kind of my yellow section, if you will. Then I'm gonna come down into the green. Again, I'm just working on one side. Can even do that vein there. Then I'm going to wash my brush and I'm going to come and blend the reds. So kind of working on the outside of this now. Then I'm going to do the exact same thing over here. I'm going to go in and do the yellows. So I'm kind of just wetting almost this kind of middle section. Then I'm going to come into my greens. I do those veins gently. Okay, because I've got a mixture of paint now, I'm washing my brush before I finish my greens because I kind of got the red and the green mixing just within the vein section there. All right, and wash my brush one more time and do the reds. And then finally I'll do the stem and the vein, the main vein, just kind of get those nice and blended together. Now with this one, I want to try something a little different. I'm going to wet these just the way I've been doing with the others, but I think I'm going to try and drop a little extra pigment in the tips. We'll see. I did color that area, but I might add some more. Let's just see how it looks as we go. So I'm going to start kind of in this, any section you can pick. I'm going to try and work one section at a time and use the veins almost as my cutoff points. The main veins, that is. I'm not going to worry about these tiny little ones. Okay, so just working up to this main vein. And I'm going to use, like I said, use it as my cutoff point so that I can have just one section wet while I drop in a little bit more color. Because I feel like this is kind of looking anemic. So I'm grabbing my red orange and I'm going to drop some of that in a few spots. Then my red violet, I'm going to just drop it kind of more at the tips where I've already applied that color. I'm just going to drop extra kind of at the tip of these little shapes. And let that move around. And I'm just going to drag it kind of also along the edge of my main vein here and this side vein here. So I'm going to skip this section and I'm going to work in this section next because I want this one to dry a little bit. Oh, I see I didn't fully wet it. I don't think. Just add a little bit of water. Maybe I'll throw a little bit of purple on those veins because they're kind of disappearing. I think I'm going to have to add more purple to the veins possibly after this is dried because they kind of, I don't know, look like they're not showing up enough. Okay, I'm going to leave that be for now. I'm going to come over here and wet this section. Again, lightest sections first. Not paying a ton of attention to my smaller veins. They're kind of disappearing a little bit. That's okay. I'll come back and add just some details after it's dried. So again, I'm going to come into here and fill this section in. All I'm using is water. Then with a clean brush, I'm going to grab some of my red orange color and we'll drop it in some spots here. Definitely I'm losing those veins. That's okay, because I'm really happy with how that's starting to shape up over there, even as it's drying. I think that's really pretty. So do the exact same thing. Now I'm dropping the violet red color in here. And then I'll do that along the veins as well. Just the main veins, not all the tiny little ones. We can always get those in detail at the end. So then I think I'm going to move on to this shape here because it's not touching the others, and I may have to grab a hairdryer to finish drying it, but we'll see. Okay, dropping our red in now. You can even use your paint at this stage, or I should say the pigment on your pencil, to kind of shape the leaf a little bit if you need to. If you kind of feel like you've got things a little bit goofy looking, you can just tweak that with your paintbrush. I'm going to wash my brush and grab some of my red violet. Again, dropping it at the tips. And then finally at the main vein. All right, everything's looking kind of wet, so I'm just gonna grab the hairdryer and dry it, and then I'll come back in and do the rest of the shapes. All right, so I'm just gonna be repeating those steps, wetting the shape, adding some extra of that red orange, then throwing in some of my red violet, but I'll speed the process up because I think it's pretty self-explanatory from here. Once everything's dry, you're welcome to grab a darker pencil if you want and go over your veins if you feel like any of them have gotten lost. You could even add extra details, but I probably would just suggest just use a darker color and add to your veins if you feel that they need it. Some of them seem to need that extra touch and some of them don't. Once this was dried, I felt like the first shape I did actually was a little too anemic compared to the other ones, so I'm just going to quickly go in and drop a little bit more of my red and my purples into there. I think I'm even going to throw a tiny bit of my golden ochre color, but I just want to make sure that I don't put it where I've already got purple. Just drop a few drops of it kind of more on top of the red. Most of the time, I think I'm not going to worry about blending those veins in. This one seems a little bit more harsh, so I'm just going to just gently wet these, trying to do this very carefully so that I don't end up messing up the work I've already done here. If you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy watching my video of fall botanicals. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!